Greetings YouTube, welcome back to the Meta channel. I am Marcus, bringing you another video for Cardfight Vanguard Overdress. In this video, we will be going through one of the core mechanics for Dragon Empire, which is the Overdress mechanic, which is centered around Nirvana. We will be going through on how to actually run and what are the units that you will want to consider running in your deck. Of course, it's not only Nirvana, the deck also has the rearguard Virina as the ace, which is this 3 Virina. So the mechanic of Overdress as a whole is actually focused solely on evolving your Trickstar into other Virina forms, either Virina or Arcus or Valiente. So far you only have this 3 Virina, which is the one showed right now. The deck does have an early retire from Virina, since you're able to effectively get a Trickstar out from your deck by normal riding from the right deck, that is. And it is also actually one of the best rush deck at the moment, because you don't really have a really big hand size in terms for this deck, and your opponent is most likely gonna hit your rearguard anyway, so your hand size is not really relevant enough to the point where it actually makes a difference. If you have a very powerful board, like say you have a double Valiente on the field with, of course, with some of your original dress material, you will definitely have a very powerful attacker, even if you only have one rearguard itself. So far, the games I have seen and tested, Virina does not really have a lot of rearguards, because most of the time they're just gonna call Virina and you just attack with it, because your hand size you don't really have a lot, because one, you discard one card from Nirvana skill to call back the Trickstar from the drop zone, and then you want to overdress on top. That's two hand size for one rearguard, and of course you want to keep overdressing on top of that unit. Yeah, so that's a lot. Most of your hand size are going through there. This deck started from a very beginner friendly to a very high skill ceiling deck, because you need to like kind of know when to kind of overdress into Arcus or when you have to overdress into Valiente, because the moment you overdress into them, you're just gonna paint a very big target on that unit for your opponent to either retire or attack. So yeah, you're gonna have to read the situation where once you overdress, it's gonna cripple your opponent to the point where his next turn is gonna do absolutely nothing to you. Well, except if they have any retiring skills, then you might need to be careful a little bit. For the right deck, of course, we have the right deck from the trial deck, which is the Egg, Reno, Ryu, and also Nirvana himself. Nothing really special. The whole right deck centers around getting your Trickstar and Nirvana out with, I think, next to no cost. I mean, there's one Soul Blast for Ryu when you ride Nirvana on top of her to get a Virina from the deck. However, there is an interesting option that you can consider when running this deck, is to replace the Egg with Trickstar himself. Now, if you replace the Egg with Trickstar himself, it just means that you will get Trickstar in the early game, so that you don't have to rely on RNG to get from the deck to your hand. Yes, of course, Reno does Superior Call one Trickstar from the deck, but then that's another 3 more. So if you want multiple Overdress unit, you still need to have Trickstar. Now for your main attackers, of course, that is without question gonna be the 3 forms of Virina. Of course, the original Virina himself only gets 10k power, but the Soul Blast 2 for retire is actually quite nice. Any deck that has a form of retire is actually really good in the current meta. Even if it is Soul Blast 2, you won't get it that often, but the greatest thing about this card is that it will be hitting for 20k by itself without any boost. And of course, Nirvana does give him another 10k, so it's a 30k by himself. Even if you do not overdress on top of Trickstar, it's still gonna be a 20k attacker. It's a beast of a unit. Not to mention if you get front triggers as well as critical triggers, so it's gonna be even higher. Arcus is kind of like the pot of greed for this deck, because once you overdress on top of a Trickstar, you kind of blast one to draw 2 cards, which does helps with the generally low hand size of this deck. And of course, he does hit for 15k, not as big as Virina, but with him giving you 2 cards is actually really good. And of course, the most threatening unit that we have currently for Overdress is Valiente. Valiente, after playing against it, I find Valiente to be quite threatening if your opponent timed the Overdress right. Because you as the Overdress player kind of resource starve your opponent, like say you're faced against another nation that needs the counterblast. You can actually like just attack the rear guard with the rest of your unit and then attack the vanguard with Valiente. This will kind of force your opponent to decide. Either they want to take 2 damage from Valiente after activating her skill, or they have to guard everything so that you don't activate Valiente's skill. Next is utility support. For utility support, the first utility support is this Nubatama Dragon, Stealth Dragon, Tensa Steep. Now, of course, this unit, of course, needs a counterblast. Have I mentioned Overdress deck requires a lot of counterblast? Yeah, I mean this is just a utility. You are able to choose not to play this one. When the attack that this unit boosted hits, you can actually place counterblast 1 to retire himself. You search your deck for up to this 1 card with the same name as your Vanguard to your hand, and then of course shuffle your deck. This one will actually give you a Nirvana to Persona right, because I don't think you want to like run more than 1 copy of Reno and Ryu in the deck. Most likely is you're just gonna get Nirvana from the deck to your hand just to secure a Persona right the next turn. But then of course the problem with this card is that it costs 1 counterblast. But of course an option is an option. Next is the card from Festival Collection, Blaze Maiden Mirren. Now Blaze Maiden Mirren is kind of like, I would say, I would actually wanted to put this card as a offensive support, but then it does not really do much. Technically what she does is basically when your Overdress unit attacks, she moves herself to soul and give that Overdress unit plus 5k power. I mean, it's just only a plus 5k power. It's not much. Then well, I mean, I'm not really sure why this card is a triple R. But then of course the benefit of this card is it does give one of your Overdress unit plus 5k power, which is insane by itself already, and it does give you 1 soul to actually use the Virina skill, the Soul Blast 2 to retire 1. Also actually quite good. I mean, you can call like 3 of Mirren down, and then when one of your Overdress unit attack, you can just soul this 3 Mirren in and give that unit plus 15. It's kind of insane too, while at the same time provide Virina with the ability to retire another unit. It's actually quite nice now that I think about it. The next card is Sunburst Evolution. Although, yeah, this card, although it only gets the original Virina from the TD from the drop zone to your hand, I mean, you can still run it if you find yourself lacking a lot of Virinas. I mean, this only works with the original Virina. Here's also the problem with Overdress deck. Almost all of the support solely focuses on the original Virina from the trial deck. So yeah, I mean, it kind of feels bad, but then of course you just have to play around this, which is why I said this deck is a very high skill ceiling deck. Do take the time to really test out this deck and kind of optimize your deck build, because you're gonna have a rough time playing with this deck. But if you do master this deck, whew, it's a very scary deck. Now for offensive support, we only have 1 card, which is this Dino Dragon. So basically what it does is when this unit boosts, it only plus 2k. I mean, there's not much other cards that Overdress really has. I mean those that actually useful. I mean, even with this being a 10k booster, it's still a very good booster for Valiente, because it will be hitting for magic number, because Valiente by himself is 13k, and for each original dress unit he will plus 5. So even no matter how much of 5k he gets, it's still gonna be a magic number to attack your Vanguard. So with this boosting at the 10k, I mean, it's still a plus. It's still gonna hit for magic number. For defensive support, we have this glorious Blitz Order. Now, of course, you will need to wait until you are at 3 damage and above for this Blitz Order to actually gain a 15k shield. But this is probably your main very reliable defensive option, because this technically adds another trigger defensive shield into your deck, so that you're able to kind of survive your opponent's onslaught. So yeah, this one does helps bite a little bit of time just so that you get your key pieces and everything. The next few cards are actually just there to kind of like retire, with the exception of the grade 2. The grade 2 does give you shield when you intercept. The problem here is that this card only works when you intercept, and it costs 1 soul. You could argue says that, I mean, you can just basically ignore the original Virina skill just to use this, but most of the time you will just discard this card as a right deck material. So yeah, I mean, the rest of it does function as kind of like retiring something from the board. I mean, anything that can actually retire is a defensive option, because you're essentially taking away something from your opponent just so that his next turn is not going to be as impactful. So yeah, do keep that in mind and try to find a key balance to the deck. I mean, these are just the option I put out there just so that you can actually consider when building an overdress deck. Lastly, of course, the trigger lineup. The current trigger lineup that I tested is actually the Troll deck trigger lineup, which is 4 of everything with exception of front trigger being at 3. You still do kind of need the draw trigger because you want to kind of fetch out Arcus and also Valiente, because the problem with this deck is that support centers around it does not really fetches any other Virina except the original Virina from the Troll deck. So draw trigger do helps a lot. And of course, the over trigger, there's no other over trigger that can beat this over trigger because it's just too strong. You can opt to run full crit with the 4 draw trigger, because your Virinas are hitting for insane numbers already, but with them just being at 1 damage is not going to do a lot. And of course, if you do dry check into a crit and give them the 2 damage, it's gonna hurt quite a bit. And of course, you can either run 1 more draw with the sacrifice of 1 more crit, because I do find that this deck you will not have a lot of hand. Just keep in mind. And that is all for the video. Do let me know down in the comment section if you like this kind of video. And of course, do also let me know if you find Virina really good, and does it really has a high skill ceiling like I said in the beginning of the video. Do like and subscribe if you like this video, and do remember to ring the bell notification icon just so that you don't miss any of my uploads. With that being said, I'll see you all on the field.